The sermon title today, A Shortage of Angels. I think in the world that we inhabit, and specifically probably American society, as part of the broad Western culture or civilization, there's not much room for angels. In the world of Hollywood, we now and then see some rendering of angels and what they're supposed to do and how it works. And then in Christmas pageants, we have the nice possibility of having angels there. And it's always a spot because there was a host of angels. If you have too many kids and you don't have roles for everybody, and to keep the parents satisfied, you make them angels. And it's interesting to observe the wings always produced for these little angels. And it's a good thing, I think, to be true to the version of Luke, that final scene in the story of the birth of Jesus, with the announcement of the host of angels there. In the account of Luke, the angels play an important role. If you read the birth story of Jesus according to Luke, Luke and Matthew uses angels in their narrative, in their story about the birth of Jesus. And in Luke, we find two parallel stories, two births that are both announced through the presence of angels. If you look in Luke, you will see that the birth of John the Baptist, that's the one track, that's the one narrative, and parallel to that, we find the narrative about Jesus' birth. That's the other track. Both of them heavy involvement of angels, announcing to this one and to that one the birth of this very important person. Angels in our scriptures and in the world of the ancients are not phenomena or figures that have a scarcity of a presence there. They're quite involved in the world of the ancients. If we go to the Old Testament, for instance, the story of Abraham, when it was announced that Sarah would have a child at a high age, etc., he met three men at the entrance to his tent, and later on he figured out they were angels, sort of an undercover operation. Looked like, normal people, but they're actually angels. And many instances we find that. Angels always, in the mind of the ancients and in the literature, the text that we have of that, on a special mission, the connection between the world of the gods or God and the people. And it's not a static image that we have of angels. Like with everything where humans are involved in all cultural creations, the image of angels change over time, depending on who wrote it and at what time in history. If we look, for instance, at the very first book in our Bible, in Genesis, if you look at the creation stories, the oldest creation story, which was placed second by the editors of Genesis in that book, in chapter 2, you find the story of God being a companion to people, taking an evening stroll in the garden, the beautiful garden. You can see God walking there, looking and enjoying the beautiful stuff, this beautiful garden. Nice moment. Looking for his companions, looking for Adam and Eve, looking for humanity to enjoy the garden with him. That is the image that we find in the book of Genesis, the oldest creation story, which is second in our version of Genesis. The one that was written later the first creation story, that is in chapter 1, the opening of Genesis, we find a different image of God. We find an image of a more remote God, a God inhabiting a sphere above humanity. That beautiful poem, the opening scene of all the scriptures of Judaism. Look at how wonderful creation is, and then a hymn or a poem evolves describing God. But this is a more elevated, remote God, not walking in the garden with his companions, with humanity, but very high above them. And that world above, where there is distance between God and humanity, I think there is the room for angels to enter into the scene. As the psychological expression of humanity to experience the presence of God. When in their minds, God was no longer like a companion walking with them in the garden, inhabiting their world with them, but God separated now. And we can see, even in that beginning creation story, that there is a dome above the earth. And beyond that, that is where God exists. And later on, there is a three-layered universe where God exists above and humans here, and then you have the netherworld below. The so-called, one can call it the cellar of humanity or of the world. Below the world of the humans, that's where you go when you die in the ancient mind. So there is a need for a connection between God and humanity. And here we find the angels fulfilling that, or answering to that need for connection between God and the world. And in the world of the angels, sometimes God was disguised as an angel as well. Or people, in the Old Testament, we find the renderings where God would speak to someone, and later on they would realize, but I thought that was an angel, but that was really God talking to me. And in this New Testament narratives, these stories, we find the angels fulfilling what they were created for in the minds of humanity, that connection between God and people, bringing a message where something important is happening, where the author almost says, like all ancient people, listen up. This is important. Take note. This is not running of the mill stuff. God wants you to understand what is happening. There is a divine message contained through the presence of angels. A divine message saying, this baby that's going to be born, John the Baptist, is not just somebody regular. That is something that points beyond the world of humanity to a world above. Something very important, something from God, and God says through the presence of the angel, understand, there's a special purpose. Heed the presence of the angel, listen to the message. God has a purpose with his child. And the same with Jesus. Several times leading up to his birth and with different people, God says through the angels, according to the author of Luke, listen, this is how special this child is that's going to be born. This is who he is. Listen, understand what is going to happen. And then this finale, where not one angel, initially one angel making the announcements, but then a host of angels, as Rich has read to us. A host of angels, every angel, almost like a general call-up going out and say, hey, everybody, leave what you're doing, all you angels, come here. This is big enough so that all of you should be present to share this and to make this announcement, the host of the angels. This text is a bit rich for me to cover all the angles in one sermon, so I'll speak about it, I think, on Christmas Eve as well. But for today, this message, the host of angels, every available angel announcing this is the Savior that will be born. Go and observe his birth in Bethlehem, according to Luke. We lit that candle, the Advent candle of the angels. And in our church, I went along with the custom that I found here, that for Advent candles we have two sets of themes. The one is the themes of joy and love and so forth, and hope. That's the one year, and the next year we do characters or figures around the birth of Jesus, and we're in that year now. So last year it was the shepherds, those shepherds. Today it's the angels. And I was wondering to what extent lighting an Advent candle of the angels means anything beyond the wreath and beyond the walls of this place. Do we do it because that's what we do? Or is there something more to it? I think in our world that candle is very, very important, the candle of the angels. Because I think modern and perhaps postmodern humanity experience a dire need for the presence of God to be a reality. To experience that God is indeed present and that God is involved in our world. And there's no shortage of reasons or illustrations to say, how can God be present if that is happening? For instance, the genocide and the horror of Syria, the genocide and the horror of the hunger and the religious wars in Nigeria, in Sudan, and so forth and so forth. One can make a very long list in these days. And you look at, let's say, the state of the nation in the US with hunger so prevalent that it is horrible to read the figures and you say, but how is it possible that so many people go hungry every day, even in Essex County? And so we can continue to make this list. And you can say, but if God is present, how is it possible? Either God is absent or God is doing a very bad job of running the show. That is a very valid conclusion if we have a specific image of God or the role that we assign to God. There is a shortage of angels, metaphorically speaking, I think, in our world. Even for ourselves, with personal suffering, with things going very bad for us, with us wondering, why me? And how did I end up here? Why did this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this? Like Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, where he says in one of his beautiful arguments with God, when he says, God, I know we're the chosen people, but can't you pick someone else once in a while? Not to make light of it, it is the reality, I think, that we battle with, to say, how do we experience the presence of God, and where is God in this world? One of the seminars that I tried to attend as part of my study leave, it's the West Star Institute, and they started with a new seminar 2 years ago. It's still in its infancy, these studies. It's called the God Seminar. And this seminar, with very, very good theologians, tried to look at where does theology, where does the thinking about God go into the future. And one of the very bright stars on the theological firmament in the US, a young guy, gave a lecture about the future of theology. And in the question time, I was quick up there, and I asked him, I said, is there a future if we keep the term theology? Because I said, I think that term, using theology and using the word God, is such, all the baggage that it carries with it will let it implode and make it very tough to speak about God. Because if you look at the world around us, God is so often associated with killing and with negative stuff that has been diffused in the minds of all people. And I said, how do we even speak about God with a history of so many bad things associated with God and with religion? And I said, I think the church has failed the membership, the theologians of the church, for not providing sufficient language and thinking about God so that we can still speak about God and experience the presence of God as a reality and a positive reality in our lives. I don't think it's necessary to go to a seminar to talk about the presence of God and to experience that. In this shortage of angels, of messengers that make the special purpose of God and the presence of God clear, in this world, we are all called to be angels. Because the presence of God, think for yourself, if you encounter somebody that is suffering, that is hungry, somebody imprisoned, and you say to them, like Jesus said, go forth, be warm, eat enough, be filled. And it stops with that language. Then the presence of God in words alone becomes a curse, a negative. But if we make God a verb, that the word God is action, then the presence of God becomes a reality. And random acts of kindness is often mentioned in society. But people walking the walk of Jesus, in their speaking, but especially in their doing, should be people where there is not random acts of kindness, but persistent and consistent acts of kindness. That is what our lives should be about. Then there will not be a shortage of angels. Things that make the presence of God a reality and make it clear. But then we fulfill that role as Jesus called on us and said, this is the way we should walk, this is the way we should be. And then the lighting of that Advent candle is a profession of a core value for the meaning of our lives, so that our world is not a cold, mechanical place, the third rock from the sun, where people battle to find love and compassion and acceptance, where people battle to find meaning, and where it's not the survival of the fittest, but the survival of the meanest. So let us heed that message of the Advent candle and the angels specifically. It is a call to us. to fill the experience of the absence of God in the world, to be the angels signifying the presence of God. What a glorious call for us. And let us write that story, that the host of angels gathered here today will indeed do such that it is not the angels singing the glory of God, but the people experiencing what the angels do, saying, yes, God is present. There is hope for me. There is hope for the world. Let us do that in this world where there's a shortage of angels. Amen.